These are some of the most disturbing crimes that happen in the Halo franchise community, and as the video goes on, things go from awful to horrifying. Chris Harris, known in the Halo community simply by his gamer tag Ozarts, was an up-and-coming North American pro player. He started off as a Twitch streamer, but was good enough to get the attention of the Eastern Media GG esports team and get signed on. Chris had a moderate following, gathering 1.3 thousand followers on Twitch, and he even had a TikTok account where he posted clips of his gameplay. Now over the years, Chris had built a good amount of goodwill with his followers and fans as he engaged with them regularly during his streams, but his actions in early 2020 left his fans and organization horrified. On January 27, 2020, Halo fans were shocked to receive a very disturbing post from Chris on Twitlonger, a site that lets users post Twitter-like posts without the 280 character limit. Now in this post, he expressed how he was struggling with his mental health.
This isn't going to be easy for me to write, because I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm not okay. I'm far from it. And this is the only way I know how to express my emotions right now. This will be extremely choppy.
Now he went further, revealing that he'd been struggling with some scary thoughts after apparently losing his day job and his girlfriend.
As some of you already know, I struggle with intense anxiety and depression issues. I've struggled for some time now. My last attempt was during UGC Daytona a few years ago. Not that it matters, but the past couple of weeks the thoughts have come back into my head. I honestly don't want to be around anymore.
Now he also announced that he was stepping away from pro play and getting the help he needed.
I promised you that I'm seeking help for what it's worth, but at the same time I really don't want to get help. Anyway, the point of this long message, I am leaving EMGG and I'm done with streaming for good. I'm sorry, but my passion is gone.
However, the slight relief that fans felt would soon completely evaporate when a day later, on January 27, 2020, an unknown Twitter account with the username HooverJMac posted about Chris attempting to leave the earth with a gun. Now the post claimed that he'd survived, but was being treated in the hospital undergoing surgery for the injuries he'd received. Now the post went viral, and soon everyone in the Halo community was talking about it. Fans showed their worry with posts like,
"I'm not kidding, there are actual tears coming out of my eyes right now. I rarely ever cry, but I can't believe what I just saw too. I'm actually devastated and I barely know him. I really hope they can save him."
And
I legit sat for a couple of minutes thinking, damn, like this sucks so bad.
Now a GoFundMe was started up by HooverJMac with the goal of helping Chris cover medical costs, and it gathered over $1,000 in donations from fans in less than a day. However, this rally of support for Chris was about to crash in an unexpected way. Hours after HooverJMac's post, another Twitter account named Sam Miller came online with some big accusations. According to them, the account was impersonating them and had used their profile picture, and things got even more dramatic when Sam revealed that Chris was alive and well.
He didn't do it. He's perfectly fine, I promise. And this dude is for sure a cloud chaser.
Now Sam could verify the information he was giving, as it turned out that he was Chris's cousin.
I don't even know what's going on. I am his cousin, and I just learned about all of this 20 minutes ago. And whoever is running the HooverJMac account is not me. Chris is 110% fine. My cousin FaceTimed him. Don't believe this stuff on Twitter.
Now these posts also got a lot of traction, and skepticism grew even larger when HooverJMac deleted his account completely. Now it was hard for fans to tell what was truly going on and what state Chris was actually in. In just a few hours though, HooverJMac's identity and intentions would be revealed, and it will lead to an even bigger controversy. In the midst of all the commotion around Chris, the Eastern Media GG CEO Steven Zimmer, known in the community simply as Zim, got involved. Not only was he worried about the health of one of his players, but he wanted to get to the bottom of the apparent HooverJMac hoax. And so he started off by confirming that Chris was in fact safe. After calling him and confirming this, he informed GoFundMe about the donation scam, and they immediately responded, offering refunds to everyone who donated. Now with that settled, the next focus was to figure out who HooverJMac was, and it would not take long before this was uncovered too. Just 3 hours after Zim's first post, EMGG released an official statement on Twitter concerning the drama.
"We want to confirm the events from this morning were in fact orchestrated. Christopher will be seeking professional help and staying in contact with us throughout the process. We apologize for everyone for how difficult today has been. We've spent hours getting to the bottom of the events and talking with them. Thank you for your patience and support in this trying time. Moving forward, we will have an updated policy to deal with any sort of events similar to this, but hope to never experience anything similar to this in the future."
It turns out that Zim had discovered as he investigated this case that Chris had set this all up by himself. Now why he wanted to scam his own fans remained a mystery to the community, especially considering that it would become clear sooner or later that he was lying. And with the community getting anxious and asking more questions, Zim confirmed what had happened. Chris had confessed that he'd been been seeking attention, and it went a little overboard with it. Now Zim also claimed that Chris regretted his actions as he asked for grace from fans.
All these events were indeed orchestrated by Ozarts. He made the account, he created the incidents. This is not a witch hunt. Please don't go after him. Chris needs help.
Unfortunately, the damage had been done, and fans felt outraged that they'd been emotionally manipulated and scammed. But they rallied behind Zim and EMGG for their handling of the situation. They swarmed Zim's post, giving praise with comments like,
"Wish the best for you and your org members in whatever hate comes because of this. I hope you also learn from your mistakes and also remove them. Stay strong, brother, and welcome to owning an org where crazy stuff happens that you can't plan, but learn to adapt to with thick skin.
And
don't you for a second question your actions. If it were to have been a real incident, this is exactly the reactions that show how much of a caring person you are. And you being that person is exactly why the EMGG community is the family that was shown today."
Now the craziest part is that even with all the backlash that he got, Chris never addressed the incident or gave an apology. He also wasn't charged criminally or banned by Twitch, although he never recovered from the bad publicity and stopped streaming a year later, in 2021. Now his career also took a nosedive, and he's not returned to the top flight pro Halo scene since the incident. But even though Chris defrauded his own fans, it pales in comparison to this next subject, whose inappropriate contact came back to haunt his career.
That earlier this year he was arrested, went to jail, charged with a felony, but due to the injustice of our justice system, he took a plea deal and was convicted of a Class 1 misdemeanor for sending obscene content with.
It was early October 2025, and Halo pro player Despiteful had been making a name for himself in the Halo competitive scene. He was slowly inching towards being in the big leagues, having already played in multiple grassroots competitions like the online tournament organizer Boom TV Gauntlet tournaments and the Halo Championship Series off-seasons opens. He'd even played in the $25,000 2023 Space Station Gaming Spartan Showdown competition and the 2023 Spartan Snowdown, where he'd placed in the top 5 in both events. However, just when the going was starting to get good, another pro player's spite would expose a part of his life that he really tried hard to hide. Despiteful's nemesis was a player named Michael Complexion Manzo, known in the Halo community by his gamer tag Complexion, or just Gunny. Gunny was also a streamer and pro player, being a core member of the Legion Gaming Halo Pro team. In early 2025, he started speaking out publicly against Despiteful on his streams, with some pretty heavy allegations. According to Gunny, Despiteful had been engaging in inappropriate contact with a person not yet of age. And even worse, Gunny claimed that Despiteful had been arrested for it, and had even pleaded guilty to a reduced charge.
We discovered through Randolph County police reports that earlier this year he was arrested, went to jail, charged with a felony, but due to the injustice of our justice system, he took a plea deal and was convicted of a Class 1 misdemeanor for sending obscene content with.
Now the internet was conflicted at these accusations, with some taking Gunny's side and others skeptical of his claims against Despiteful. According to Reddit user CakeBeast,
"Very bold of Despiteful to start Halo drama online, with this dark cloud hovering around your life. Now the entire world knows your story."
Another user by the name of NYCK also chimed in, saying,
"Just put the fries in the bag, dude. Just get a job, dude. Jesus."
However, Despiteful never even responded to the accusations. As far as people knew, he was just going to let things cool off naturally. Now, Despiteful wasn't the only thing on Gunny's plate, however. He and the rest of the Legion Gaming team were about to go into the biggest competition of their professional careers. You see, Legion Gaming was one of the lesser established teams in the Halo competitive scene, and they were on the verge of being able to prove themselves on a big stage. They just managed to make it to the last chance qualifiers competition, their final chance to compete at the 2025 Halo World Championship, and winning this would mark the organization's first entry into the HWC, the biggest event in competitive Halo, run by the Halo Championship Series and 343 Industries, which is the developer of Halo itself. Now the qualifiers were held from October 3rd to 5th, 2025, and Gunny, along with the rest of his team, locked in. After a blowout 3-0 win against Kraken CSGG, another up-and-coming team in the Halo esports scene. Now Legion Gaming qualified, earning their place in the HWC, but in just a few hours after their impressive achievement, the brewing feud between him and Despiteful would resurface, and this time with serious consequences. After Legion Gaming's match, as the players were walking out after the event had concluded, Gunny and Despiteful ran into each other, and they started to confront each other about the statements Gunny had made. Now after some back and forth, they started threatening each other, and Gunny then took a swing at Despiteful, hitting him on the back of his head. This charged things even more, and it looked like an all-out brawl was about to start, but the two men were quickly separated by Gunny's crew, and that seemed to be the end of it. But by the next day, the drama had blown out of proportion. On October 6, 2025, Legion Gaming released a statement on X, condemning the fight that Gunny had gotten involved in.
"As an organization, Legion Gaming does not allow, stand for, or endorse any acts that violate any code of conduct by anyone who represents us. That is not who we are. We wish to thank our fans for their continued support, and we ask that our privacy be respected as we continue to navigate the situation.
However, the case was far from over. Even though HSC never released a statement, it became clear that they were taking it extremely seriously. Gunny's suspension wasn't lifted, and the closer the World Championship got, the more likely it was that he wasn't actually going to make the competition. And to fans, this seemed to be a big disappointment, that Gunny's career would be so quickly derailed just when it was picking up speed. But the Spiteful didn't seem to care. He celebrated his win against Gunny, posting on X,
"Damn, imagine sneaking up a slap on the back of my head from behind and then getting banned for life. Womp womp."
He even went as far as making fun of Gunny by streaming with the troll image of Gunny as his profile picture. Now this prompted some backlash from the community. A Reddit user named StraightGas69 posted about it saying,
"Look, I'm not defending what Gunplexion did at Charlotte. It was definitely not acceptable behavior on HCS grounds. But come on, it's over. Why is dude still trolling him on streams and using more rage bait pictures? Let it go. If you listen to him talk, he sounds like a bratty teenager with no respect for anyone. What a loser."
Now fans also brought up the very accusation that Gunny had brought up against the Spiteful, pointing out that he never addressed the actual accusations. According to Reddit, users stop reading this please.
The Spiteful is guilty. APG talked about it in his stream and people found the documents. Some posted on the sub, but mods removed it.
Now this actually prompted the Spiteful to go off the radar, and even though there haven't been any public updates on any legal complaints against him, his Twitch eventually got suspended, and he hasn't been heard of much since then. On the other hand, Legion Gaming went on to participate in the Halo World Championship, but the loss of Gunny seriously affected the team, and if that wasn't bad enough, HCS did not allow the team to substitute Gunny, forcing them to play with only 3 active members. Now they were very easily overwhelmed by their opponents, getting eliminated very early on in the competition after a 0-3 loss record. Gunny has not been involved in any professional Halo event since the incident, and it's unknown if he'll ever resume. Still, he managed to avoid jail time, unlike in the next case where a teenager got lured into a life of crime after he got tired of losing too many online games.
So today I've got Ricky Handschumacher with me. Now look, Ricky represents so much of the story of a highly talented, bright kid who found a pathway of experimentation that led him into a world that became criminalized.
On July 18, 2018, 25-year-old Ricky Joseph Handschumacher was preparing for a job as a Port Richey Park employee. Little did he know that in just a few minutes, local and federal law enforcement would have his house completely surrounded, because it turns out that Ricky wasn't just a park employee, and this raid would expose an empire of crime that had lasted for years. Almost a decade before the cops came knocking, Ricky was a totally different person. He was a 16-year-old baseball prodigy with a .4 batting average. This means he got a hit in 4 out of every 10 swings as a batter. He was so good in fact that he'd even considered playing professionally. When he wasn't in school or playing baseball though, he enjoyed playing games on his Xbox, especially Halo 3. But there was a problem. Multiplayer games are vulnerable to cheats and exploits, a problem that still exists to this day, and Halo 3 was not an exception to this. Ricky very often lost games to one of those cheats, known as standby, or using a lag switch. How it worked was that a host player would put the internet router on standby mode, and this would make the other players on the opposing team get stuck and unable to interact with anything, allowing the host player and their teammates to have complete control over the game, and so they could easily eliminate their opponents without any difficulty. Now Ricky hated being standby, so much so that he decided to do something about it, and this is where he started to get involved with the shady side of the internet. A friend from school introduced Ricky to an online site where he could learn how to fight back with attacks of his own. Ricky got involved, and he soon learned how to launch distributed denial of service attacks, or DDoS attacks. In a DDoS attack, a huge amount of useless data is sent to a target, clogging up its internet so badly that it can't work anymore, causing their game to lag and glitch. Now with this attack, Ricky's enemies were powerless and unable to do anything while he eliminated them over and over again. Now each attack cost about $10, but to him it was money well spent. Now from then on, he dominated his Halo lobbies, winning game after game. In his words,
"It was like getting free wins. You felt like you were in control and there was nothing they could do to stop you."
the DDoS attacks were a slippery slope though, and soon Ricky craved for more, and so he became part of an online group of cyber tech specialists known as the Community, or the COM. This group ran more serious operations that went beyond gaming squabbles and deep into the realm of criminal activity, such as wire fraud, which basically means using technology to scam people, which is a federal crime, and money laundering, which basically means illegally concealing the origin of money you've earned through illegal stuff. Now Ricky learned a lot from the COM, especially social engineering, which is finding ways to bypass security systems by tricking actual people into giving sensitive information. Now with the skills he learned, he got involved in getting rare Xbox gamer tags for sale. He started with his own username, managing to have it changed from Ricky6 to Wolverine. Now there were a lot of people on the dark web who wanted cool tags and were willing to pay hundreds of dollars for them, and in a short amount of time, Ricky had made tens of thousands of dollars. For almost a decade, he carried on with the scheme, but soon he realized that he could make a ton more money from a more direct approach to cybercrime. By this time it was already 2017, and even though the now 24-year-old Ricky had started working for the city of Port Richey, Florida as a park employee, he was also a cryptocurrency bandit. He did this by SIM swapping, a trick he'd learned from the community. He would convince mobile carriers to transfer victims' phone numbers to a new SIM card that he controlled, and then he'd use the stolen phone numbers to reset the email and passwords of his victims' crypto wallets, which he then would rob. Now that required relatively little work, and because crypto is designed to be decentralized and anonymous, once the money was gone, it was almost impossible to trace or get back. Now he made millions of dollars during this period with the help of his buddies at the comp, but eventually he started to draw attention to himself from the one person he least expected it from. In February of 2018, Ricky's mother, who he lived with, we'll call her Joanne, was at home with her son one day when she overheard him talking on the phone with someone while pretending to be an AT&T employee. She immediately sensed that her son was involved in some shady business and raised the alarm, calling the police and informing them of her suspicions. Now this led to a raid on the home, where police officers uncovered evidence including multiple cell phones, SIM cards, and computer files containing an extensive list of names and phone numbers of people from around the world. Now a month later, in March, law enforcement in Michigan also caught Ricky collecting the personal data of a new target with public Wi-Fi at a local library, and during this raid they seized 45 more SIM cards, a laptop, and a Trezor wallet, which is a physical storage device for cryptocurrency. Now a third search was done in April 2018 after Ricky's mom realized that he'd gotten another mobile phone. This time they found 2 large bags filled with SIM cards, as well as a fake driver's license and passports. It looked like Ricky was ready to escape, so they had to act fast. Now by this time they'd gathered enough evidence against him, and so they finally started to build a case. Detectives were able to find 2 victims of Ricky and the comp, and when they interviewed them, they discovered that they'd been scammed out of about $150,000 each in cryptocurrency after their phones were hijacked. Now a third victim they found also claimed to have lost $50,000. Now investigators also discovered that in May 2018, the group ran an attack and stole 57 bitcoins, worth between $470,000 to $500,000 at the time, from a single victim. In all of this, Ricky was an important member who was helping the comp collect data and distribute the loot to all members. Now with the money the comp had stolen, they bought a lot of luxurious items like designer clothes, luxury vehicles, and even jet skis. And with all the data they collected, the only thing left to do was to bring in Ricky and his associates. Now this brings us back to the morning of July 18, 2018. A local and federal agents raided Ricky's Florida home and arrested him. He was charged with grand theft, money laundering, and cryptocurrency laundering. At first, Ricky fought the charges, entering a not guilty plea in court just 5 days after his arrest, on July 23, 2018. However, when he became aware of how watertight the case against him actually was, he flipped and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit electronic fraud and identity theft. US District Judge Denise Page Hood sentenced him to exactly 48 months in federal prison, and he also had to pay back $7,681,570 to his victims. 9 other members of the comp were also arrested and charged, including 22-year-old Connor Freeman, who pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison by an Irish court, and 29-year-old Ryan Stevenson of West Haven, Connecticut, who pleaded guilty and was sentenced to probation in the District of Connecticut. Ricky served just 27 months of his 4-year sentence at Federal Correctional Institution, Miami, a low-security prison. After getting released from prison, he became an advocate for cyber safety and the use of internet skills for good. He even partnered with former FBI contacts and was on a podcast where he discussed the mistakes he'd made when he was younger.
It's awesome to be here, get the word out, spread the word, make people aware. Just, like I said, when I was younger, I didn't fully grasp what I was doing. I knew what I was wrong.
But unlike Ricky, this next case ended tragically, because this next person's prank ended with a loss that was more important than money.
It turned out the 911 call was fake, swatting as it's called, but an officer did open fire and an innocent man was killed.
On December 28, 2017, 25-year-old Tyler Raj Barris was doing one thing he enjoyed doing on the internet: trolling. This time though, things would go completely wrong, and his actions would permanently alter not just his life, but a family as well. You see, it all started when Tyler was a kid. Tyler's father had died in a car accident when he was an infant, and his mother was not stable as she had issues with drug addictions. So Tyler grew up with his grandmother, Wendy Gregory. Now he had issues making friends, and so he instead spent a lot of time playing online games, especially Halo on the Xbox 360. Now eventually he started to gain taste for the toxic side of online gaming, giving himself edgy usernames like Torture God and Swatistic. In time, his craving for toxic engagement would lead him to pushing things a little too far and reaching from the internet into the real world. He started to learn how to make fake phone calls and cover his tracks using voice-over internet protocol spoofing, which disguises people's true numbers, virtual private networks, which mask IP addresses to make them seem like they're coming from somewhere else, and temporary numbers. He used his skills to troll and prank people online, which he seemed to really enjoy. He even regularly bragged to his grandmother about his cybersecurity skills. Now he started off small with minor false reports to law enforcement, but on September 30th, 2015 at 1:52 p.m, Tyler, now 23 years old, made his first major attack. He called the Glendale Police Department in California, introducing himself as someone named Alex. He then told them that he'd placed several backpacks containing explosives inside the news station of KABC TV, adjacent to Griffith Park, and that the bombs would be detonated in 10 minutes. Now officers immediately issued an evacuation order as they rushed to the news station. They then swept through the entire building with bomb-sniffing dogs, but couldn't find any explosives. And after the false alarm, the police then tried to trace Alex, but at first they were unable to. What Tyler had just done is called swatting. It's when someone calls emergency services pretending to have a serious situation only for there to be nothing. And to him it was all just a prank, but these serious situations can end very badly. Apart from the fact that swatting wastes government resources and can disrupt the running of businesses, it can also be dangerous for the people affected. And this is a lesson Tyler would learn a little too late. He claimed that he'd gotten the idea to swat after being a victim of swatting himself earlier that year, in February 2015. He said,
I remember hearing the helicopter hovering over our house for about 5 minutes before I realized it had to be a police chopper. How cool would it be, I thought, if I could do that to anyone I wanted. It was just appealing to me, to be able to completely and anonymously own someone like that and not get caught.
Now Tyler's grandmother, Wendy, figured out that he may have been behind the attack after she heard him bragging while watching the news. And when she confronted him about it, he admitted to it, but then threatened her, telling her that if she ever exposed him, he would hurt her and destroy the house. Now Wendy, scared, instead tried another way. She informed her friend, who was a Northridge police officer, that she suspected that her grandson was responsible for the SWAT attack, and this led to a raid on the home and Tyler's eventual arrest. He refused to defend himself against 2 counts of felony false bomb reports against him and was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in Los Angeles County Jail. He was released on January 20th, 2017, a year and 4 months after the incident, but his criminal streak was far from over, and over the next few months, he became even more specialized in swatting. After his release from prison, Tyler couldn't return to his grandmother's home, as she'd gotten a restraining order against him, and so homeless, he decided to make a living out of swatting. He lived in a shelter in South Los Angeles, which was a 15-minute walk from a public library, and so he used the free computers at the library to run a scheme, charging people between $10 to $50 to target gamers. Now he carried this out for months, even going as far as calling in 2 bomb threats during a Call of Duty tournament at Dallas Convention Center in December 2017, although he was never arrested nor charged for this. However, just days later, a routine SWAT attack he set up went sideways. On December 28, 2017, Tyler was contacted by 18-year-old Casey Viner to put a SWAT attack on someone. Casey had gotten into an argument with another gamer, 19-year-old Shane Gaskill, in the middle of a Call of Duty World War II match. The argument had gotten heated and had moved from the game to Twitter DMs, and as the exchanges got worse, Casey had threatened Shane, and this is where Tyler got involved. Tyler followed Shane's Twitter account, hoping to gather information on where he lived, but Shane got a hang of what was going on and messaged him saying,
Please try something, I'll be waiting.
And he then proceeded to send him his address.
I'll have you in prison for 5 years, buddy. Casey already gave me all the proof I need.
Tyler got to work. At 6:10 p.m, Tyler pretended to be a Wichita number and called City Hall, claiming to be a person named Ryan, and saying that he had committed a domestic shooting, held his mother hostage, and planned to burn the house with gasoline. And in just a few minutes, the police got involved, and by 6:24 p.m, they had already surrounded the house. Now there was just one thing about this all though. Shane didn't actually live in Wichita, and the address he'd given wasn't his home. It was his former address, which was now the home of a guy named Andrew Finch. Andrew was a 28-year-old father of 2 and worked at Sonic Drive-In and was at home at the time. At 6:24 p.m. on December 28, 2017, the cops closed in on him. They called out to Andrew with their PA systems. Now the officers were of course armed, as they were prepared for any type of situation, and with their guns raised at every possible point of exit, Andrew was ordered to step out of the house. Now he was scared, but he managed to follow the officers' instructions to make it to the door. He opened it and stepped out, but he accidentally dropped one of the arms he held up and was struck in the chest by a single round from Wichita PD officer Justin Rabb's sniper rifle. And Andrew would pass away just minutes later at 7:03 p.m. as he was being treated at the hospital. Now regardless of the unfortunate shooting, the officers charged in, handcuffing everyone in the home. And it wasn't until Tyler called a second time giving inconsistent information that they realized that they'd been giving false info. Tyler also had no idea what was going on, even after Shane messaged him to gloat for giving him the wrong address. And it wasn't until news of the shooting went viral online that he realized what he'd done, and he immediately became defensive, denying any wrongdoing. In a bid to give his side of the story and influence public opinion, he got on the online entertainment news show Drama Alert, hosted by Daniel Keem, popularly known online as Keemstar. And when Keemstar accused Tyler of showing no remorse, he responded by saying,
I am. The only thing I wasn't going to take responsibility for was killing someone, because I didn't kill anyone. Now, I didn't say that I have absolutely no responsibility in regarding this individual, which admittedly I do, unfortunately, and it really sucks being connected to this incident in any way. If I could rewind, I would, because this is all stupid.
Now Tyler was arrested shortly after the interview. Casey was also brought in because he'd hired Tyler, and so was Shane, as he'd given Tyler a wrong address instead of calling the cops, even though he knew this could have ended badly. Now Tyler was charged with 51 charges, including making a false report, cyberstalking, conspiracy, and multiple counts of hoax threats. Casey was charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice, and Shane was also charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, but also with the crime of making false statements. Lisa Finch, Andrew's mother, testified on April 17, 2018, saying,
"The death of my son has changed every iota of my being. I am astonished by the transformation that has been brought to me. I have a different idea of myself. I have been basically forced to alter everything I do. I do not recognize the person I was before."
Now Tyler also made an appeal to the court, claiming that he had no idea his actions would end the way they did.
"If I could take it back, I would, but there's nothing I can do. I'm so sorry for that."
He pleaded guilty but negotiated with prosecutors to get a lesser sentence. On March 29, 2019, 26-year-old Tyler was sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison and was required to write apology letters to police, dispatchers, and the Finch family. Casey also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 months in prison, and Shane got 18. Now after the sentencing of Tyler, the Finch family also sued the city of Wichita and Officer Justin, the man who shot Andrew, demanding $25 million in charges. And on March 14, 2023, after 4 years and a closed-door Wichita City Council session, officials voted 6-1 to approve a $5 million settlement for the family. Now Tyler went from an edgy teen to facing the consequences of his actions in prison, but in the next case, a missing game ignited the rage of a mentally unstable man. Siale Tinowai was an unwell man. At just 20 years old, his mental health had deteriorated to the point where he had to be placed in a mental health sharehouse in Sachs Creek, Queensland, Australia. The inhabitants, who had various degrees of mental health issues, shared common areas like kitchens, bathrooms, living spaces, and even bedrooms. However, in January 2013, Siale would breach the trust of his housemates in a horrific crime that shook the country. You have to know, Siale had a violent upbringing and was eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, which is a personality disorder with a mixture of anxiety and delusions caused by severe childhood trauma that eventually leads the person to form two or more distinct mental states that can range from either carefree or impulsive to highly destructive and dangerous for both the person and the people around them. In Siale's case, this usually meant sudden bursts of violence, and because of his condition, he had to be put on constant watch in a facility while psychologists observed and tried to help him. This is where he met 43-year-old Craig Stewart Field, a father of two who was Siale's roommate. Craig had 2 sons with intellectual disabilities, and he'd been hopeful to get custody of them. Now when Siale and Craig first met, they seemed to get along just fine. However, something dangerous was brewing under the surface, and the once peaceful coexistence would soon be disturbed. After a while of living with Siale, Craig started to accuse him of stealing his belongings. Siale denied this and insisted that he'd kept to his own things, but the issue started to escalate, and Craig started to get more and more paranoid around Siale. One particular part of this issue was the games. Craig had a collection of games he cherished, and soon the allegations settled around alleged missing games. One of the games was Halo. However, Siale would later say,
"He accused me of stealing his games. Halo. I don't even play Halo."
Now soon, Siale himself started feeling resentful towards Craig, and he hatched a plan in his mind, one that would alter both their lives forever. First, he visualized what he was about to do. He drew an image of himself and wrote the words,
"Craig, you're gonna die."
Now he left this note on a shared table in the facility, but no one took it seriously, and they assumed Siale was just frustrated. But this would turn out to be a big mistake, because in January 2013, he moved beyond just threats. A female resident who also lived in the facility heard heavy steps above her, followed by Craig shouting for help. According to the witness, Craig screamed out,
"Help me, he's trying to kill me."
Now she immediately rushed into action, running upstairs to see how she could help, and when she got there, she saw that Siale had sat down on Craig's upper body, pinning him to the couch. However, what was more disturbing was what he was doing with it. Siale had a pair of household scissors in his hands, and he was stabbing Craig repeatedly in the torso, neck, and head. Now the other housemates hurriedly called the police and emergency medical services, but by then it was already too late. By the time the paramedics got to Craig, he'd been struck over 200 times and was beyond treatment. After the attack, Siale fled the scene before the authorities arrived, and this prompted a manhunt for him. Now he was found shortly after and arrested, and when brought in for questioning, he doubled down, insisting that he'd done what he had to. According to him,
"He tried to stab me, so I defended myself and killed him. I grabbed the scissors, then I pushed him on the couch and went on him and started shanking him."
When he was told that Craig had died, his response was simply,
"Sweet ass."
Now Siale's apparent lack of remorse, coupled with the letter he'd written before the murder, was proof of premeditation, which didn't make his case look good to defend. However, Siale had no intention to fight the case in court either, and he pleaded guilty to murder in the Brisbane Supreme Court, headed by Justice Peter Davis. And on June 20th, 2019, Justice Peters sentenced 27-year-old Ciale to life imprisonment with the option of parole only after 20 years have been served. Now this came as a relief to the family of Craig, who'd been waiting for closure on the case. It turns out that Craig had been killed just 6 days before a hearing that would have determined if he could regain custody of his sons. And when his son, Kieran Field, who has Asperger's, a form of autism, spoke about the incident, he said,
"That was tough. I don't like that at all."
Now Ciale remains in prison till today, with the earliest possible release date for him being 2039.